go ahead and introduce myself. My name is Elise Fry. I am the Test Administration and Formative Assessment Specialist with the Utah State Board of Education, and I work with 4 different systems in the assessment department, one of them being the AAPPL assessment. Just so that you're aware, we also have other USBE team members as well as members from our vendor, LTI, who are assisting us, supporting in the chat, as well as answering any questions you may have as we go throughout. Just a note for you, this meeting is being recorded and it will be available for future reference once it's posted on our assessment YouTube channel. When that happens, I will add the link to the assessment director weekly memo. If you are not part of that listserv, you are also welcome to reach out to me directly and I can send you that link when it's available. It does take a couple of days for the recording to be rendered and uploaded though, so just kind of be patient with that. Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. So this afternoon, we are going to look first at how to roster for AAPPL because it can be a bit tricky, how to request accommodations. It's important to note that this process has changed slightly from years previous, so just kind of be aware of that. We will also go over how to best prepare students and teachers for testing, the testing process itself, and how to access your reports. And that way, you can share this information as needed with the audiences that you work with. So just some general information to be aware of with the AAPPL test. LTI, or Language Testing International, is our vendor who provides the actual assessment for performance toward proficiency in language, which we shorten to AAPPL. USBE works with LTI to administer this assessment to all 3rd through 9th grade students who are enrolled in our DLI programs, so our dual language immersion programs. There are 4 separate test components to the AAPPL assessment. These can be administered back-to-back or separately. Just be cognizant of the time allotment for testing if you're in a more secondary setting where it might take longer than a single class period to complete one of the assessment sections. The AAPPL test does require headphones and a microphone to complete, so you'll want to ensure that teachers have the appropriate tools and hardware that's compatible with their classroom devices to ensure that it provides the most optimum environment for testing for those students. Students are rostered into the AAPPL system through UTREX automatically, as long as, this is a caveat here, as long as they are rostered appropriately. You won't have any issues. Okay, if you're not seeing students, you'll want to reach out to Maureen Rushing, our assessment data specialist, who can help you with some troubleshooting, but she's going to go over the rostering process here with you in just a couple of minutes. The testing window this year is set to begin on October 16th and close December 1st. We encourage you to test early. We'll hit on this more throughout the training, but please know the earlier you test, the fewer issues you're going to run into. Just one quick example. If you have a student who receives a score that you wish to challenge with a rating review and it's too close to the end of the window, retesting may no longer even be an option as there wasn't enough time to complete the rating review. We want to be able to provide students with the best testing environment possible, and testing earlier in the window really helps with this. Okay, this slide is comprised of a myriad of links which will help you prepare for AAPPL administration. For what it's worth, I will also create a PDF of this slide deck, which Emily can send out to our participants after the training is completed, so you'll have access to these as well. The first link is a YouTube video which will walk you through the process of managing any of the teacher accounts that you need to, because as LEA level users, one of your responsibilities is to manage the teacher accounts that are assigned to your LEA. The second link is a link to the AAPPL Utah website. LTI provides super easy access to information which is specific to our USBE DLI window and Utah's DLI schools on this AAPPL Utah Central webpage. The third is a link which will run a systems check on the devices that students are using to ensure everything is compatible with the testing system, and we'll talk about that as well a little bit later. Then it's followed by a link to the technical requirements that are required for any device that's expected to administer an AAPPL assessment. Next is where you can find the spreadsheet for requesting accommodations as needed. The next link will allow all users, students included, to take a demo version of the AAPPL test. This is imperative because it is the best way to familiarize students and teachers with the functionality of the system. Don't skip that step. The next one is a link for the URL for site administration. And then finally, there's a link to a library of other Apple tutorials and instructional videos, which may help you navigate the testing process as you go through Apple from start to finish. Most of these links are found in the Apple account resources, as well as on the home screen of the Utah Apple Central site. So I'm going to give Maureen Rushing, our assessment data specialist, a few minutes to talk about rostering for the Apple assessment. And Maureen, just let me know when you need me to skip a slide for you.
All right, thanks. Hello, everybody. So here's just a basic overview of how your student information gets into Apple testing. It's student information is first entered into your LEA district SIS. Your SIS then submits that information to UTREX. It's validated, making sure it's without error. Once that information comes into UTREX, then our assessment vendor, in this case Apple, will come and pull that information and roster your students for assessment. We can go to the next slide. In order to be rostered for an Apple test, your student must be enrolled in grade 3 through 9. They need to be actively enrolled at a school on our list of DLI schools. They need to be actively enrolled in an eligible course, and those are assigned core codes. That's how we know it's an eligible course. And you don't have to worry about ordering tests. It happens automatically once your student is rostered. We can go to the next slide. All right, so we roster students with teachers according to the core code assigned to their course in your SIS. If a student happens to be enrolled in 2 courses that would make them eligible for a test, we choose the highest priority code, and we have lists published of these core codes. We'll go with the one higher to the top of that list. So in this case, the one with the green rectangle, that Chinese DI homeroom, that's going to be the course the student rosters with. I realize this is a screenshot of an old list. We don't have the Chinese DL2 honors courses anymore, but just to illustrate, higher on the list is going to get the priority. We can go next. If you have a student that isn't rostered with you, that should be, you need to check and make sure that they are enrolled at a school that will roster them. You should ensure that they are enrolled in a course with the correct core code. You should check those entry and exit dates on the student record. You should also check and make sure a student is enrolled in another school. Sometimes students will be enrolled in more than one school, and the other school will win the tiebreakers, and they'll roster with them. You also need to ensure that they have no UTREX errors. Any student with a UTREX error is not going to roster for an assessment. And next. And of course, if you have any questions or if you aren't seeing a student you think you should, please feel free to get in touch with me and I will be happy to check it out for you.
Thanks, Maureen. Our next section, we're going to look at some Apple accommodations. Jessica Wilhelm is our accommodation specialist who works with the Apple assessment. She's going to take a couple of minutes and review this process. And this is where, from the very beginning, when I said that something has changed slightly from years past, this is one of those things. So kind of be aware of this as she's explaining the process.
Okay, you can go to the next slide. All right, so for accommodations for the Apple testing, they are for students with disabilities who have outlined in the student's IEP what accommodations they should receive. Students receiving accommodations on the Apple test should be receiving the same accommodations they receive in the classroom, but always with the caveat that some classroom accommodations are not always appropriate for assessments because they could invalidate an assessment. We've included here our link to the accommodations policy manual there in the bottom corner of your page. Next page. All right, so when you are in the Apple website, you can go to the accommodations tile on the Utah's Apple Central site to begin your process for requesting accommodations. And after you click on that tile, it will bring you to this page, and this is new from last year with some information which is downloadable for you. So on the left-hand side, the first is a PDF outlining the accommodations guidelines and the online request form you will need to fill out. And we will go through that process here in a second. Next page. All right. So outlined in red, when you click on access the document, this is the guidelines document, and it kind of gives you an idea as to what accommodations are provided. And you can review this with your teams in your LEAs to determine which ones need to be requested for your students. And there are some embedded options which are provided for all test takers. And then certain accommodations will have to have a formal request through Apple. Next page. And here are some outlines of the accommodations that do require that formal request, and we'll let you read that yourselves. Okay, so here is a change from last year if you have used Apple system before. This is a change in the process for requesting accommodations. This online form allows you to submit the request for single or multiple students at once, and the hopes is to make the request process more efficient and easier to track. Next page. So this is the request template, and you need to enter the information required on the online form. And the information is on there to guide you through this process. It's pretty user-friendly. For single learner requests, you'll fill out the form completely online. And if you are making multiple learners, it will prompt you to use an Excel file. And if there is a special or other accommodations are needed, then the single learner form must be used. So if you have a special request, you cannot utilize the multiple learners form. You're going to need to use that single learner form. When you submit the form, the requests are sent to LTI instantly, so there's no additional steps that you need to take. There's nothing additional that you need to submit via the client site. And you will know that that was successful because you will receive an email confirming your request has been submitted, and then you will receive another email when the accommodations are loaded in the system and the tests are ready. You no longer need to monitor the accommodations status in the client site because you will automatically get that email once the request is submitted and again once the accommodations is loaded into the system. If you have any questions about this process, feel free to reach out to me at USBE.
Thanks, Jessica. So the first step in test prep is to review the rostering overview from Marine. Okay, then familiarize all users, LEA level down to students with that demo. There are times that we get retest requests with the explanation that students didn't know that's how the system worked, or the student didn't know to respond in the target language. These types of issues are just easily addressed if the student had become familiar with the demo prior to the test administration itself. As an LEA user, part of your responsibilities includes updating teacher accounts associated with your organization. This includes ensuring that all accounts associated with your organization are correctly marked as either active or inactive, which we'll review how to do that here in a little bit shortly. However, if a current user has just forgotten their username or password, they can just use the prompted links that are on the sign-in page to recover their account. They don't need you or LTI to do that for them. As you prepare for testing, I would also recommend that you work with your tech or IT people to ensure that all of the devices which are going to be used for testing have gone through the systems check process. Because a lot of times, even when I was in the classroom, sometimes we rely a little too heavily on our technology working as expected without going through the proper assurances to make sure that's actually the case. And when you and your students are in that testing environment and things don't go as planned, it can be a little bit stressful. So the systems check can help to alleviate that stress prior to administration. Homer, I can see in the chat you put same for new teachers. Do you mean to access their information on the client information center?
Yeah, they're new in the school, so if they need to have like a new credential, I'll just put the forgot my password and create a new credential.
So for your newer users, after you get their account created, they will also receive a welcome letter from LTI that will go out October 2nd or later, okay, depending on when their account is created. We'll have their username and password in there if they're a new user. Okay. You'll also want to orient yourself with Apple Central. The URL is included here on this slide, but I would recommend bookmarking that site if you haven't already done so. The site's very user-friendly, super easy to navigate, and has all of the information that you would need. So Christine, do you need to add new teachers? You will need to check to verify their accounts, and then Utrex will
Sorry, can I jump in?
Yeah, definitely. Mark, go for it.
I'm Mark from LTI.
Magic.
So when Utrex sends over the files to us, if there is orders for a new teacher at a school, our system recognizes it and generates or creates the username and password. So when we send out the welcome letter on October 2nd, they will be added. So there's no need if they're already in with the right core codes and I think assignments into Utrex, they will come over and we will create that new login for the teacher and their new ID or account with the Cactus IDs.
Thanks, Mark. Does that help clarify it, Christine? Okay, perfect. All right, so with that systems check that I mentioned on the last slide, you'll want to again work with your technology or IT department personnel to ensure that the devices students are going to be using during testing are compatible with the system. I've included a rough rundown here, but more detailed guidance is included on both LTI's website as well as Apple Central for Utah. If your students are using iPads, there is a section very specific in the account resources in that information with very specific recommendations and troubleshooting practices, as when there are issues with Apple administration, it tends to be iPad users that have some of those issues. So be aware there is a section devoted specifically to iPad users. The ability to play audio is required to complete the Apple assessment. So using high quality headsets and microphones really help to ensure that students are being provided with the best testing environment possible to complete it. When it comes to iOS systems, it's highly recommended to use iOS products in conjunction with that system. As a teacher, I know full well the draw to the bulk earbuds where you can buy 500 pair for like $20. But this is not ideal for Apple testing administration. Those generic brand products are going to cause you some headaches during your systems check and test administration. So just kind of be aware of that. The network bandwidth is another repeat offender issue when it comes to Apple administration. Just because the devices are all running as expectedly individually doesn't mean that when you get dozens of students all using them at one time on the same network, that the same success will be experienced. So I would strongly recommend that you reach out to your IT specialist to ensure that the network bandwidth will easily support all of your students who are testing at the same time. The administration of the Apple test requires that all proctors complete their testing ethics training prior to administration. Make sure that your students are in a secure testing environment. Students should not have access to extra technological devices during their sessions. Testing tickets would be considered secure testing materials, so they need to be disposed of appropriately once testing's been completed. They also need to be stored securely in the interim while you're waiting for testing to be available. The scripting provided in the Apple proctoring guide isn't provided as a suggestion. Reading it in its entirety is required, just like with our other vendors for testing. You'll also find it in the Apple account resources within the site under the link Apple Proctoring Guides. And last, but probably most importantly, active proctoring is required. The very few instances we've had with Apple testing ethics violations would have been easily prevented with active proctoring. So teachers should be on their feet, ensuring that students don't have access to backpacks, notebooks, phones, smartwatches, other computers, those types of things. If you have any questions regarding testing ethics, you can reach out to our testing coordinator, Kim Rathke. She'd be happy to answer any of your questions or provide any clarification you might have. One thing I really like about the Apple demo is it allows users to experience the audio, video, and the question styles of the test. It's significantly shorter. Responses aren't stored, so it's not going to give the students a score, so it's very low stakes as far as its environment, but it provides students with a very comprehensive experience. Just know that if you stop the demo mid-demo and restart, it's going to start from the very beginning, not where the student left off. Be aware that for the presentational writing assessment, you also might need to adjust some keyboard settings just on devices for optimum usage. In the demo, users are going to see drag and drop activities. They're going to see matching questions. There will be written response questions. There will be ones where you read text and answer questions based on the text itself. There's also a listening test that feels kind of like a live chat in the target language where the students click a play button and someone will speak to them and they will respond to the questions verbally in the target language. It helps the student become familiar with the testing platform in a really non-threatening way. This is also a great way for students who may not speak English or the target language fluently to get support from their teacher regarding the testing system and the directions without violating any ethical practices. That type of support can be provided during this demo situation. Another step teachers will want to take prior to testing is familiarizing themselves with that proctor guide that I mentioned before. There's a link provided on the Utah Apple Central site, and I've also linked them here in the slide's title. When you click on the proctoring guide tile, you'll click the appropriate proctor guide for your program's target language. This document will provide the required scripting I referenced when we talked about testing ethics, as well as other helpful guidance regarding the test administration. If users are familiar with the idea of like a test administration manual or a TAM that we use with some of our other vendors, this is very similar in content. That proctor guide is very similar. It has guidance for all users for before, during, and after testing, as well as other recommendations to consider. It starts with test prep. It even includes what you should be doing a few weeks prior to testing, right up to what you should be doing the few days before testing. So I would recommend jumping into that document right away. It breaks the guidance down by role as well, explaining what IT personnel should be doing, what teachers and students should be doing, and so on. It then goes through the entire testing process. Again, what you should do after each testing component has been completed, how you can access your scores, as well as some special guidance, again, for any schools using iPads. It's got those extra nuances explained in there that you'll want to be aware of. We're going to stop just for a brief moment here to see if there are any questions on what we've covered so far. So we're like the logging in, the technology prep, testing ethics, the demo itself, proctor guide, or if you had any questions for rostering or accommodations, feel free to come off mute or drop them in the chat.
I did want to mention something for accommodations that we did not stress in that section. When you were requesting accommodations, LTI really request and needs 10 business days. So please ensure you are calendaring that appropriately in your preparation for your LEA testing. 10 calendar days for accommodation request.
Thanks, Jess.
So, Elise, I do have some questioning on rostering, but I think it's pretty complicated. I think if it's okay if I save that to the end.
Yeah, that's totally fine. Yep, not a problem. Any other questions before we move forward? Or comments from LTI or USBE before we move forward?
Elise, sorry. Are we going to cover adding the second teacher to a course?
Yes.
Okay, good. I was just waiting for that to come up.
Yep.
So I'll be quiet
in the next section.
Excellent.
Okay. All right, with that, we'll go ahead and just move forward then. So we're going to jump into one of your biggest LEA responsibilities when it comes to prepping for Apple administration, and that's the cleaning up of teacher accounts associated with your LEA or your school. So within the user maintenance area, you can check the hierarchy of your LEA and schools associated with it prior to testing. You can create new accounts or deactivate existing accounts which are no longer needed. And that's just going to allow for smoother sailing once the window opens. This process is outlined through the resources, but we're going to go through it in detail here. Whenever you need to update accounts, you'll use the user maintenance option from the left-hand menu list. Note the big yellow caveat here. The account name is the teacher's cactus number and must remain the teacher's cactus number. It cannot be changed. The reason for this is it's used for file integration. So if you change the account name, maybe say out of convenience, the sync for ordering tests and creating rosters isn't going to work correctly, which is anything but convenient for you. So truly, if you take one thing from today's training, please let it be this: don't rename the cactus number. After you go in to select the account, the user information is going to appear, and you can edit or add any information as needed. You can also mark the user inactive if they're no longer in your building, or mark active if they have come back. Just be sure to save those changes so that they're reflected in your client site. If you need a new sub-account for a new school in your LEA, you can reach out to AAPPL Help with that request. This is what Maureen was referring to. If you have students who happen to be rostering under their English teacher rather than your target language teacher, reach out to LTI with the information I've included in this spreadsheet example, and they can add the target language teacher as a user to the English teacher's account. And this is going to allow the target language teacher to print test tickets and access the needed information rather than relying on the English partner teacher to do it for them. Okay. If you have teachers moving between schools or districts, you'll also need to contact LTI. Neither you nor I nor anyone else at USBE can perform this task for you. You'll just need to be sure to provide the information that you see on this table when contacting AAPPL Help at languagetesting.com. So this is a really good slide to take a quick picture of or to mark for future reference. Again, the slides will be sent out to you so you can refer back to it as well. This process is going to go much more smoothly for you if you provide all of this information up front when you send that initial email. Do we have any questions regarding accounts, whether it be creating them, deactivating them, moving teachers between schools? Let's see in the chat. If we have a couple of schools that have shut down, do we need to do anything about those? Mark, do they need to do anything with schools who have closed?
No, the test data is there and we want it to stay there. It's more of, it's going to continuously display on the accounts when you look at it. If you want to have them made inactive and the data still exists, or we do not delete schools or accounts, you can send an email to AAPPL Help saying that, school, Mark Dolsky High School, please make it inactive under your district, and we can do that. But we do not delete accounts because of the data. So, but if you want them to be removed kind of from your display, I can make them inactive on the back end.
Thanks, Mark. Any other questions about accounts?
Yeah, I may get misunderstood. So when you say user maintenance, I can see like two teachers that they are not teaching anymore. The grade level. Do I do something with it? Or just,
Homar, can you put your question in the chat? You have a lot of background noise.
Oh yeah, we have intervention.
So I think he was talking about users. What we call users are the teachers. So the teachers or the users, those you can make inactive through the user maintenance tab. It's the actual accounts that you cannot touch, and that's controlled by LTI in the back end. So logins for the teachers, the users of that account, can be made inactive by the LEAs.
Omar, does that help answer your question?
Yeah, but how
It's through the user maintenance, and I think once you log into your account and look at the user maintenance section of the manual, there's some instructions that might be able to assist you on that. If you're not sure and you're hesitant, you can send an email to AAPPL Help. I'll probably see it, and we can touch base or maybe connect so we can do it together.
Thank you.
Yes.
I have a question, Elise.
Okay.
Is there a way to hide previous users? I know we can't get rid of them because of data, but I mean, like we've been doing this for a lot of years. I've got schools that may have 30 cactus numbers, and I have to sift through them all every year to I'm checking for classes and students, and it's really time consuming.
If you
Is there
said,
a way to do that?
I'd have to make them inactive on the back end, so the users don't have rights to make them inactive. So if you want to send an email to Apple Help with those cactus IDs, is that who was speaking? Alan?
Alan, yeah.
Is you're at Alpine District, right? I think so.
Correct.
Yeah. So you do have a lot of. I'm actually looking at it now. But if you send me that it's account cactus ID 44907 under Alpine Elementary, please make inactive, and you just put a kind of like a little spreadsheet together. LTI can take care of that on the back end, and so by making it inactive, it should drop off of your view.
Awesome. Thank you.
Any other questions regarding accounts? Yeah, no problem, Brett. That was a great question. Okay. All right, then we are going to move on to testing tickets. They're also known as labels. When you're ready to test, testing tickets can be printed from the client site under Apple Test Status. As a friendly reminder, these are considered secure testing materials, so they need to be stored securely when not in use and then disposed of appropriately when testing is completed. Please do not distribute them to students prior to the day of testing in hopes that they keep them safe. They shouldn't go home. They shouldn't be in backpacks. As a hint here, when you go to find your tickets, the shorter date range you have, the quicker the system is going to generate the tickets for you. So I would recommend just using the testing window block of time, so like October 16th through December 1st, and your search will be handled a lot more quickly if you're doing it for a larger block of time. Prior to printing those tickets, you'll need to grant access to pop-up blockers just in case that permission's been denied on your device. You can select the format for printing and view an example of the tickets. It will have all the information on the ticket required for testing. You can see in the screenshot example here that it has the student login information with the student's name, their unique username and password, what target language the student is registered for, as well as the site to access their tests. As you're going through the testing process, you can actually check the completion status of the Apple tests assigned to your organization. To do this, you'll log into the client site and scroll all the way to the very bottom of the page where you'll see a graph. Under type, where you can see I've put that red box, you can change the drop down to read by one level below. And the schools in your LEA are going to populate. When you hover over their respective bars on the graph, their completion percentages will appear. So you can see in the example here, I've hovered over a school that has 90.19% of their Apple tests completed. I would recommend checking this a few times a week throughout the window so you can communicate with those schools who might just need a gentle nudge to get done before your window closes. And speaking of that testing window, that window can really creep up on you. I know this sounds a bit silly, but the sooner your students begin testing, the sooner they're done testing, which leaves more time to review your reporting and submit retest requests. So in addition to this, no rating reviews will be accepted after the window closes on December 1st. And that last week of testing window can always be a bit crazy anyway. If you look at a calendar, you'll notice it's the week after the Thanksgiving holiday. So along those same lines, this means that the week prior to the last week of testing isn't even a full week of school because most of you have Wednesday through Friday off. Okay, so you'll want to take that into account as those are also not necessarily working business days for LTI either. As with any of our other testing windows with any other vendors, the last week of the testing window should really be reserved for students who were absent during your initial administration or students who may have received a UR and need to retest. Okay, there will be a test push that's kind of like an automatic submit, which occurs once the window's closed to submit tests, which students have started, but they haven't finished. It's a really good idea at the beginning of the last week. So think like November 27th to look through your schools and rosters to determine who hasn't finished up to this point and just kind of push to get them done. You could check that little graph I just showed you. This is just, it's not a great time to begin the process. Okay. So sometimes it's even just students who think everything was complete, but they just didn't click the last submit button, which is a really easy fix. Just have them go in, log in, and click submit. Like they thought they were done. The test part itself was done. They just hadn't hit submit yet. So just some other little things to kind of be aware of. When testing is finished, you can access the reports from the LTI client site. There's 3 different reporting options, and we're going to just take a quick glance at each one and what they look like. Before we dive into those, when looking at AAPPL reports, you'll want to be familiar with the performance scales. So if you notice here, it starts with advanced learners at the top and goes down through novice. It also includes the form of the test the students take. When you are viewing the AAPPL national report, the little orange dots represent the national average. I know they're tiny, but I've tried to draw attention to them using the red boxes here. Those orange dots represent the national average for each of the 4 test components. You'll be able to see the breakdown for whatever filters you set. So if you're looking at a specific school or teacher or grade level for those same components shown on the bar graph measurement and how the school compares to the national average. Those filters I referenced allow you to filter or sort by a teacher's cactus or name. They allow you to sort by the target language and grade level, how many years the student's been enrolled in the DLI program, as well as the type of instruction they are receiving. The AAPPL school report allows you to better review performance for an individual class. So for the school report, it allows you to see the performance of individual classes and breaks those down by the 4 separate components that the AAPPL test tests. The longitudinal reports are also provided. You'll need to search by year, okay, not a specific date because it's searching for the years that the student took a test, and then by language, and then by student. Here you can see how student information is reported over the course of multiple years. It includes the student's name, the language in which they took the AAPPL test, which school or schools they were enrolled in during the administration, their grade for each individual test, as well as the year they took it, and the scores received on each component. This can be exported to Excel if it's ever needed to share with a teacher or parent as well. When it comes to UR or unratable tests, there is a report for this very specific test as well. These are filtered by teacher, school, and then language. The UR request goes to the teacher and district. These can be then viewed or filtered by various options. If you select school, you'll see which school and languages have UR results as well as how many. If you select teacher, you'll see which school the teacher is assigned to, as some DLI teachers are employed by multiple schools. And you'll also see the languages that have UR results as well as how many. And then finally, if you select language, you'll see which languages have UR results and then how many. These also can be exported to Excel if needed. And then for here, are there any questions regarding testing tickets, checking completion status for your schools, the testing window itself, or reporting? Let's see, Corey, I can see one in the chat. Is there a way to get group longitudinal data reports rather than individual? Mark, is that a possibility?
That report is designed for tracking an individual across time, not a group of individuals. So that's not possible.
Okay, thank you.
But if you do want to see group information over time, you would just run your by school or by teacher report and just do a different filter and then just run that multiple times by whatever year you want to see. So you can kind of generate that larger view over time, but you just have to run that report per year that you want to run.
Thanks, Jen. Other questions for testing tickets, how to check completion, reporting? Okay. The next component to AAPPL testing that's a little bit new is rating reviews. This is a newer process, so just be aware it's changed from previous years. Okay, a rating review is when a teacher questions a score issued and would like to send the student's test. Generally, this is like the ILS, the interpretive listening and speaking, or the PW, presentational writing response, for another round of scoring. This generally takes 10 business days, so you'll want to plan accordingly. Also, be prudent with your requests because the system is only going to allow an account to submit 10% of the ordered tests for a rating review. So to kind of break that down, if you have 50 students assigned to one target language teacher, so like they're 25 morning students and they're 25 afternoon students, that teacher is going to be limited to 5 rating requests. Okay. So the new process is as follows. They will log in and select Apple Test Status option from that left side of the screen. And then they're going to search for the date range for the components they want to have reviewed. The search results are going to load, showing you a list of all Apple tests associated with the account within the date range selected. For tests that have been completed and rated, you'll see your students' scores listed by first and last name. You can click on the speaker and the paper and pen icons to access their responses so you can hear what they said or see what they wrote. Okay, you just click on those icons to access the student responses. You'll also see something new this year in the Apple Test Status page. You'll see an information icon, the little eye inside of a circle. It'll be included with any final scores of UR, which is the unrateable, or the NR, which is not rated or not scored. As of June, when a rater indicates that there were maybe some factors that were impacting the learner's rating, you're going to, again, see that little circle with the eye. Okay. These new reason codes are to help clarify the process for the raters so that they can kind of handle those tricky cases a little more consistently. It's also going to help teachers and administrators better understand factors that might have affected a student's Apple rating. It's also going to provide LTI with better data around the tests that have those specific issues, which in turn also helps them better quantify and troubleshoot any of the issues that may have been related to technology. Okay. You'll see additional documentation linked also on the client site homepage. But back to that little information icon. When you click on it, you'll get more details about the reason for the rating code that the learner received. You can see here in the first example, it outlines that the learner chose not to respond to the prompt. The second one says the learner responded in a language other than the target language being tested. The third example outlines that the learner experienced a technical issue and goes on to explain that the system will generate a new test for that student with new login information. The last one explains that the student test was submitted with insufficient number of responses to be graded, and that learner is going to be issued a new test as well. So that little information button really provides you with a lot more feedback than you've been able to have access to previously. It's only going to be displayed, though, when the rater has indicated that there was no evidence of production at that level. So they're going to select one of the reasons listed for below, like an N1 or an A1. So when a rater encounters a response that's unrateable for other reasons, they have 4 additional ways to tag that, okay, when they submit their reading. Those tags are like any alarming comments. We also would call these alert papers with some of our other vendors. Those are going to be finalized with an NR or not rateable, okay? And then an incident report is also prepared and sent by LTI to both the client and to USBE. This might also happen if there's a suspected honor code violation, meaning like cheating or an issue with academic integrity. Honor code violations and alarming comments will also be reported to USBE, and you'll need to follow the appropriate avenues with Kim Rathke, our testing coordinator, to address those. Another tag would possibly be if there's poor audio quality, so like surrounding noises or the student whispers rather than speaking more clearly and coherently. That's going to be finalized as a not rateable or an NR. If there's a technical issue, that's going to be finalized as a UR, okay? And a UR test is one of those that's going to have that automatic reorder overnight so that the student can retest at the school's earliest convenience. These added details, along with access to the PW and ILS responses, really need to be reviewed before requesting a rating review. Again, you've only got 10% of your total orders, so you want to make sure that you're using them as prudently as possible. So once you've reviewed all of the necessary information, you'll just make the determination to request the rating review or accept what was originally posted. If you choose to request a rating review, you're going to then look for the Request RR link, and you'll need to scroll to the far right of the Apple Test Status Results page to find that. And a pop-up window will open when you click that link that requires you to select which component you want reviewed for the request, as well as the reason for the request. Once you click Submit, you'll need to click Yes on another confirmation pop-up just so that it proceeds. And once you do so, your rating review request is going to begin processing. Again, before you request an Apple rating review for either of those two components, please be sure that you've reviewed the reason codes as well as the student responses. Only proceed with the request if you really feel the rating that was received is not consistent with the learner's written or spoken responses while taking the test. This is a great time for me to reiterate to you the importance of informing students of your testing expectations prior to administration, because sometimes we get rating review requests with the reasoning that the student didn't know they were supposed to do their best, or the student just wasn't trying hard enough that day. These are not reasons to submit a rating request, because students should have been informed of the importance prior to testing. And also, much to our dismay as educators, students have the autonomy to not try their hardest as well. So just kind of be aware of that. You also shouldn't be requesting an Apple rating if there was no response entered by the test taker, whether that's a written one or a spoken. Again, students get to choose whether they respond or not, okay? You also wouldn't submit one if the test taker responded in English for an Apple test that targets a different language. Again, working with the demo provides students with the appropriate functionality so they can test that out. Another reason you wouldn't submit one is if you think the test taker should have received a different score purely because their daily language production in the classroom is different from their production on the test. Apple scores are based solely on the test taker's demonstrated language ability while taking the test, okay? If after you submit a review, you change your mind, there is a limited window where you can cancel the request in the event that you made a mistake somewhere or you realize that it's no longer needed. Guidance for canceling is also found in the Apple resources. Carrie, I can see your question. So are teachers able to request a rating review, or is only the district assessment coordinator? Jen, I can't remember what we decided as far as what user could do that. Can you help me out?
I think last year we decided you wanted those to go through the coordinator, and we're actually hoping there will be so few requests this year because those new codes account for like 80% of the issues that come up in rating reviews. So hopefully you will have so many fewer, so much fewer, whatever, significantly fewer rating review needs. But we're hoping that those will continue to go through than your
our LEA users. Okay,
right.
Thank you. As far as unrateable scores go, here are just some tips for avoiding unrateable tests. We talked about how the system does an auto submit push at the close of the window, but it will also do this very same thing if the test was started and not submitted within a 14-day period. So if a student starts a test and doesn't finish in the first session, you'll just want to ensure that there's time for completion within a 14-day block so it doesn't automatically submit a partially completed test. And also know, though, that 14-day window starts over when a student logs in a second or a third or, however many consecutive times it takes. So, for example, if a student starts a test on Monday and continues it on a Wednesday but still doesn't finish, that 14-day window is now from Wednesday, not from Monday, that original start date. I also want to address something with the speaking test. Students do not have to fill the entirety of the time to receive a good score. For example, if students have been given 4 minutes to respond to a question, they can still give a very well-constructed verbal response, which could warrant a great score in a minute and a half. There's not, the students aren't at risk of having a UR issued for not taking the entirety of the time that's allotted. Okay, the score is determined by how well the student responded, not how long the student responded. Next, you want to add something there, Mark?
So I want to correct the auto submission part starts from the first time the student accesses the component. So it's component specific, and each one has a 14 days from the first time it's accessed. It does not reset if they log out on Monday and log back in on Wednesday. So the date will start from Monday.
Okay,
just
thank you.
for clarity. So it's really important that once a student accesses a test component, that they complete it, which means submission within 14 days.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
As we mentioned previously, ensuring your technology is good to go is really foundational for the successful administration for Apple. So please do the system checks. We've also noticed that clearing cache and cookies on a browser before testing can also be helpful. Proctors should also really work to minimize background noise as much as possible so that when a test goes for rating, the raters can easily hear what the student has submitted. Now we're going to review the resetting and reordering of student tests should the need arise. This is minimal, okay? In the event that a student receives a UR or unrateable on any component, the student's going to be able to automatically be issued a new test code overnight. The student will be able to log in again, and the test will be available through the client site the next day after you receive your notification. And that's where that new little information eye becomes really helpful, okay? When it comes to retest, that type of a request is different. So if tests are rated below N1, students are not automatically issued a reorder because oftentimes the students' responses were still scoreable. So even if as a teacher we don't like the score, we need to be careful with those things. In the event that you truly feel a student needs to be reissued another test, you will need to contact both myself and Carl Bowman with the details as to why. And we will need to authorize the reissuing of the test. And this would take place after your rating review. Okay, we would need the specifics regarding the testing environment and situation just to help us make that call. Just as with other state tests though, just because or that the student didn't try their hardest or we just know that they're capable of better, those are not reasons to reissue a test. So please help your students understand the importance of doing their very best and staying focused the first time when the testing environment is there, like when they're initially in that environment beforehand. More importantly, these retest requests also still have to happen within the testing window. So if a student's taking their test on November 30th and you somehow were able to view their score on December 1st, while you can request that rating review through the system, a new test is not going to be reissued as the window will have closed by the end of the day. In the event that you do end up having to reorder a test for a student, there's a couple of steps that you'll need to take. First, and not listed here, but touched on earlier, you'll need to contact myself and Carl Bowman to approve the reorder request because we have to approve what had occurred. Even after you had submitted a rating request, if it still came back and you weren't happy with it. And then we will have LTI grant the permission to your account to reorder that test. To clarify, these are not tests which have received the UR or unrateable score. Those will automatically generate for the student the following day. These are for students being issued a second test because the first score has been challenged. Okay. If we approve your request, you would follow the steps to reorder the test. So you'll click on the test requests in the client site once that has been added to your account, and you'll choose Apple. You'll need to download the registration form and then fill it out. And it's an Excel spreadsheet. You'll then save the changes you made to that downloaded spreadsheet and then upload it to the appropriate spot in your client site. Also note here that the system is going to alert you if any of the required fields were left blank or if there was an error on a form. For example, when one was being submitted last year, a column had somehow inadvertently been added to the spreadsheet and it's not going to allow it to go through, even if it's blank. So just be aware of those things. If it's not working, something has happened, and you might just want to download the form again and start over. Keep in mind, this would be for a very, very small number of students. Okay, this is not for en masse population. You can reach out to Apple Help if you need any assistance with this process as well. Also, another thing here is a rule of thumb that's a good hint. You'll always want to use a new template if you end up having to make a request a second time, because if you try to change the data in the spreadsheet that you saved previously, you might run into some issues. So just always go into the client site and download the most current version, blank version of the spreadsheet before you fill it out to re-upload. If you have a student who does not complete a test but is supposed to, you will need to enter non-participation codes. When you're accessing your list of students with ordered tests, you will see the non-participation link at the far right. When you click on that, you'll select the appropriate participation code from the drop-down menu that is specified by the testing component. So this allows you to enter codes for each individual testing component. For example, if you have a student who has submitted a parental exclusion form for the Apple test, you'll need to ensure that parental exclusion was applied to all components that were ordered for the student, whether it be one or all four. Make sure that you enter that for all of them. And then once you've applied the code, it will appear on the list. This slide just includes some frequently asked questions that I've received repeatedly, as well as a link up there at the title to some frequently asked questions that LTI has on their site. Feel free to access the linked items on your own, but this just gives you a quick glance as to what I generally see the most. The account resources tile is a great one-stop shop for relevant information and tutorials to commonly asked questions. You won't actually see client site manual like we have seen in the past. It's just going to show up as Apple resources, but it's housed under the client site. It's organized by major themes, topics. I would just urge you to be really familiar with the information that's in the Proctor Guide, as many of your questions are actually answered within the documents that are there on the resources. As a hint with searching those online versions, Control F is your friend. It's really easy to find what you're looking for when you click on one of those and just do Control F, like search accounts, and then any page that has the word account is going to show up for you. It's really nice. Are there any questions that you have that relate to rating reviews, the NRs or URs, how to reorder if needed, participation codes, or just anything we haven't covered so far in the training? Again, you can drop them in the chat, come off mute.
I do have a question.
Okay.
When it comes to native speakers, let's say a Spanish speaker or French speaker who arrives in the country and starts the DLI program, and we are asked to assess the student, because the prompts are usually in English. Some of these students cannot understand the prompts, even though they're native speakers, and they very often end up with a poor score. So what can we do about these students? Thank you.
Jen, help me out. They can do the directions in the target language. Is that correct? But nothing else?
Yeah, so you can process that as an accommodation where you'll do the directions in their, for example, a français or whatever, right? The English prompts are designed to be at a novice level. So if they have novice level English, they should be okay. But if they truly, are not even at a novice level in their English, then as an accommodation, that support for the instructions is okay.
That's a local accommodation.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's not submitted through the form.
Correct.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Elise, you've got one in the chat there.
I found the last few years we have students with tests ordered that are not in a DLI class. What's your suggested testing code for students that don't take the test? I would probably reach out to Maureen and make sure that you're using the right core code, because they shouldn't be rostering for a DLI test if they're not in a DLI course.
But just make sure that those test credentials are not issued or given out, because if they're not there, they need to be not distributed and used.
Yeah, thank you. For what it's worth, I just skipped to the very last slide that has all of our contact information on it. Is there a spreadsheet we need to use for English or target language teacher, or do we make our own? Rachel, what do you mean by spreadsheet?
Sorry, I saw that you guys had the slide that was for English or target language teacher. So our English teacher, do we just make our own spreadsheet?
Yeah, it just needs to have that information included.
Oh, okay.
It's included on the example.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah. Just as a reminder for you, this recording will be posted to our assessment YouTube channel in the next few days. I'll include it in the AD memo. I'll have Emily share the slide deck out as a PDF for anyone who participated. With it being 3 o'clock, I want to respect your time and you are free to go. But if you need help with any other assistance or questions, I'm happy to stay on for a few minutes, or you're welcome to reach out to any of the contact information that's here on this slide. For Apple support, I've listed the Apple help site as well as their 1-800 number. If you have questions regarding dual immersion, you can contact Carl Bowman. You can contact me for test administration questions. If you have any rostering, data, or course code questions, reach out to Maureen. And accommodations, you can reach out to Jessica. Okay. But if you are done and good to go, you are good to go. But again, I'm happy to stay on for a few minutes and answer questions if there are more.
So, Elise, I'm going to ask my question.
Okay, go for
So, when I came last year, this stuff had already been done for me. So, this is my first round going through this process. I did help a little bit with it. We had some students that are magneted into a dual immersion school and they're going to their home school. So, their boundary school, but they go to a different school just for their dual immersion languages. So they would have to get set up, and I know that's a rostering issue. I can't remember how I did it last year, but I did it. And there was a problem because I did it before the tests were issued. And Mark, you called me. I was in Paris. I don't know if you remember that call. So,
I think we had you upload and order the students. I think we got an exception with Elise and gave you the test request module.
So I will do that after you load tests, or should I do it before the tests get loaded?
We've received the file from Utah, from Utrecht, and they're actually been loaded to the system. So they are available to be looked at. The welcome letter for all the teachers and everything will not be generated till next Monday, the 2nd. But they are, sorry, Elise, if I spilled the beans here, but
I shared it earlier, so you're good.
Oh, okay. So they've been loaded except for one small account that we're still working on, waiting for a response on something. But Christine, if you want to go check to see if they're there, first do that, then reach out probably through Maureen with a copy to Elise, because if we need to add that module to allow the test request, we can always do that.
Okay, and so thank you so much. I'll probably be calling y'all because I can't remember how to do everything, but
no problem.
But
We're
anyway,
here to help.
You've always been awesome to help. Thanks. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. Anyone else? All right, then with that, we'll go ahead and end our training. Thank you so much for attending. And again, feel free to reach out if you have questions that come up after. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.